guys could all join us. Today, our topic is engagement scores. So we're going to be running through engagement scores. This is a topic that I really love. I think this is a really unique feature within TouchPoint. I've said before, I think engagement scores is really where database management gets fun. We go from all these things that we're doing to really dialing it in and zeroing in. And then from that springs ministry. All right. So, sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm not used to flying solo. I'm flying solo today. My name's Andrew. I lead the consulting and onboarding team here at TouchPoint Software. I see a lot of familiar names over here in the chat. So some of you have worked with me before, but if you never have, then it is my job and the consulting team's job to come alongside our church partners and help them install whatever initiative it is in the database. So this could be anything from engagement scores to emails, and just how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish ministry utilizing TouchPoint? And that's where me and my team can really help you make the most out of the software. Okay? You all have undoubtedly been to webinars before, but just want to remind you, the chat is open, the Q&A portion is open. We will have time at the end for some questions, and so I'll be happy to address questions as they come up. So with that, here's kind of the itinerary for our webinar today. We're going to talk about implementing engagement scores. We'll start with measuring engagement. What does that look like? Monitoring engagement scores, manufacturing your team, and making informed decisions based on those scores. So first, what are engagement scores? Okay. So if any of you haven't used engagement scores before, we'll define them briefly here. An engagement score is a tool to track the health of the congregation and health of an individual as it pertains to your church. Now, what I always like to say, many of you have heard me say this before, an engagement score is not a measurement of how much Jesus loves this person. That's not what it is. It is a ministry tool. It helps us see how someone is doing as it pertains to our church. Are they plugged into our church? Are they growing within our church? Are they falling away from our church? And those tools kind of help us paint a picture of who this person is. You know, your database can track a lot of amazing things like attendance. It can track giving. It can track volunteers, and so on and so forth. And those metrics by themselves are really great, but they don't tell us the entire picture about an individual. Someone might be attending on a regular basis, but what does that really tell us about volunteerism or going on mission trips and things like that? Likewise, someone might be giving to our church, but they've not been coming to special events that we'd really love them to participate in. So engagement score is where we take all those elements and combine them together to paint a broader picture of who this person is and how they're doing in our church and the congregation more broadly. Like I said at the top, I think that this is where database management gets fun. All those things, all that time that you all spend, this team especially, that you all spend talking to your different ministries about, hey, we really need you to record this data in the database. We really need you to enter it this way. We need you to take attendance. I know it's hard because, some ministries, they don't want to take attendance. That's not their DNA. But if you'll do it, it'll help us so much with ministry. And I think engagement scores is one of those places in the system where that all comes together. And to kind of give you a sense of where this conversation is going, if you look at the left side of the screen, that screenshot there, I want to one little note on this, because we have people here that I can see who've been longtime users of TouchPoint. Some of you are brand new, maybe even in the onboarding phase. This is a screen that has been stylized just a little bit, just for clarity, so we can see it all a little bit better. But this is generally what the screen looks like. You can see the bar graph going up and down there, and I can see the scores on the left-hand side. And so when we have our engagement scores in place, we'll be able to see a bar graph like this that gives us a sense of how that person is doing in that engagement score. Okay, so with that, let's dive in. So measuring engagement. How are we going to measure engagement? Now, we are going to talk about the Andrew Triplett 5 buckets of engagement. Some of you have heard me go through this before. For others, this is going to be brand new. But what I want you to know is don't look in the TouchPoint documentation and search for Andrew Triplett engagement buckets. It's not there. This is the Andrew Triplett engagement buckets. Okay. So in my opinion, in my mind, there are 5 buckets that we can use to track engagement. All right. So you might come up with, 7, 10, 12, 15 different metrics that you want to track, but I believe they fall into kind of these 5 buckets. And so this is really just kind of a rubric that you can use as you're trying to decide what are those different metrics going to be. And do we have at least one metric represented from each of the 5 buckets? All right. So number 1, this is the easy one, membership, the membership bucket. All right. So engagement scores are built off of searches. So if you don't know what the search builder is, the search builder is the primary reporting tool in TouchPoint. It is the place where you go to add conditions to the search to whittle it down to a list of those that you're looking for. And you're going to use the search builder to build out these different engagement scores. We have some really, really great resources and tools to help you learn how to use Search Builder. So I might touch on Search Builder just a little bit today, but today our primary focus is, of course, these engagement metrics. And so when I say that this is a simple search, what I mean by that is you're going to build a search that's really just looking for those who are members of our church. So some of you kind of are going to define some of you are going to define these a little bit differently than others. For some churches, membership is something that is tracked in depth, in detail. We have a letter received date even. We get the letter and that's what gets them into the process or into membership of our church. And for others, it's just a matter of someone kind of raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm affiliated with this church. I'd like to be a part of it. And that's what gets them in. To membership. So whatever that is for you, it just needs to be recorded somehow, some way in the database. It doesn't necessarily have to be the membership itself. It could be some other kind of metric where they're just saying, again, I identify as being a member of this church. I am a part of this church, part of the mission of this church, and it is where I'm coming to engage with the kingdom community. All right. So typically, the score that is associated with membership is going to be a low score. We'll talk about scoring and scoring methods here in just a moment, but each of these metrics that we're putting together, you're going to assign a score to it. And you might want to weight those differently than others. This is one that you're not going to weight quite as heavily because what does it take to be a member of the church? For sometimes it's just, again, raising a hand and saying, I'm a member of this church, therefore they're going to receive these engagement score points. So you want to make sure that you're kind of factoring that in, which is a good segue into the second bucket, which is attendance, the attendance bucket. All right. So this is a little bit more complex search. These are people who are actually attending something at the church. They're taking that step of coming down to the building and being involved. This is one that does, it needs a bit of a rigid definition. So I work with a lot of churches on building out these engagement scores. And typically the conversation goes something like this, that one of the engagement scores needs to be active attender. Okay, what does it mean to be an active attender at your church? And they'll say, well, it's someone that attends a lot. All right, what is a lot? 4 times. They attend 4 times. Okay, all right. So what's that day range? Well, that's 4 times in a month. And then they think about it and say, well, that's once a week. And so maybe that's a little tight. So let's back that off to maybe 3 times a month, something like that. So whatever it is, you just need to kind of keep drilling down into that until you find, hey, what is that line that we say this is an active attender? For some churches, that is, like I said, that's someone who attends 3 times in the last 60 days. And for others, it's going to be 6 times in the last 90 days. Whatever it is, you can build that out in the search builder to put that together. And then consider different ministries as you're putting these together. Make sure that you're thinking through, someone that is an active attender that we would define as an active attender in the youth department, in the youth group. Well, we're going to have a different standard for those that are in this year adult department. Those those numbers look different. So how are we going to account for that? There's some really clever things that you can do with Search Builder to make sure that you're accounting for all of those different scenarios. Okay. The third giving bucket, the third engagement score bucket is giving. All right. So, of course, we're going to be, when we're talking about engagement and how bought in someone is to the mission of our church, we're going to look at giving as a part of that. So again, very similar conversation. What does it mean to be an active giver? How does someone become an active giver? And this one does require a little bit of thought, a little bit of consideration. So again, similar conversations I've had with church in the past is they'll say, okay, so if someone gives once a month, so say 12 times in a year. So if they give 12 times in a 365-day kind of increment, then we know that they're an active giver. And that's great. I agree. That probably is a good definition of an active giver. But some of you, your minds have already gone here. You're ahead of me. You might be thinking, well, but that's going to preclude a whole bunch of people that give one time a year at the end of the year. So, we have a giver who at the end of the year, they give a $2,000 gift one time on December 31st, and that's their gift for the year. Well, that's an active giver as well. I think we would agree. That is someone who is also actively giving to our church. So we want to make sure that we're building out these engagement scores in such a way that we're not missing anyone, that we're taking these different scenarios into account. Okay. Number 4. All right. The volunteer bucket. All right. So this one can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And as it says on the screen there, definitions might differ between ministries of what is an active attender. So, for example, in childcare, for our childcare workers, a lot of times they're checking in right along with the kiddos, and that's great. That is kind of a best practice that we recommend is for those leaders, those adults, to be checking in to those classes just with the kids. And so, from that perspective, very simple to determine who are our volunteers, who are those that have engaged, raised their hand, and said, I'm going to volunteer at my church. But then for others, we're not taking attendance. Well, 2 things there. First, this is a great opportunity to start. This is a great reason to kind of explain to your team why it's important that we take attendance for volunteers. I talk to a lot of churches that tell me that that's just not our DNA. It's not something that we've done historically. We don't take attendance for volunteers. And I understand entirely. There are passive ways to take attendance. The mobile app is a great example. So kind of going around, seeing who's shown up to their volunteer commitment, and then just marking them present there in the app, so they don't have to take any action. We're really not asking anything new of them. We're not asking them to go to a kiosk to check in and that kind of thing. They're doing the same thing they've always done, but now we are taking a moment just to take that attendance. You can also empower lay leaders to do this as well. At my church, we have different leaders who kind of help organize the different volunteer groups. And so you could empower them. So now you're not having to convince the entire group of volunteers, just those that are kind of the ones leading these different volunteer initiatives. So that's the first thing I'll say is this is a great time. I know processes can be difficult, change can be hard, but kind of giving that communication of like, hey, this is why we're doing this. It's not to see if you're here or not, and it's not to come down on anyone. It's just to help us get a broader picture of our congregation and of our ministries. Are we doing a good job of feeding our congregation, of taking care of our parishioners? Okay. So, of course, there are those scenarios where it's just not possible. We can't take attendance. There's all kinds of factors. Our building is too spread out. We have a very large building, so we might have volunteers over on the east side of the building, and I'm over on the west side. I have to be there, and there's just no way I can ever know whether or not they're here, and that's just the way it's going to be. Completely understandable. And that's where kind of we phase into the 5th bucket, which is enrollment, the enrollment bucket. And you got to see there even on that slide, that 3rd bullet, include elements of attendance and enrollment. So what that is hey, if they are volunteering, hopefully you all are putting them into some kind of involvement in the database. Therefore, therefore, we know that they're volunteering by virtue of the fact that they're in there. And so that is the fifth bucket of enrollment. So when there's a lack of data, when there is, a scenario where we're not taking that attendance, really all we know is, are they enrolled? Yes or no? Are they enrolled in that? And that can suffice. That can do the trick. A great example of this is, if we're trying to see people who are engaged, they're volunteering, and maybe they're going on some mission trips. Well, you're typically not going to take attendance for a mission trip, obviously. And so that's where enrollment comes in. Did they enroll for the mission trip? Did they register? Therefore, paying the deposit, paying the balance, and we know that they're going on that trip. If yes, then perfect. Then we know that they then qualify to have those points from the engagement score. So these definitions might fall outside of the scope of like normal activity, like I said, with mission trips and other volunteer opportunities around the community that we're not taking attendance for. We're not tracking real carefully, real closely, but we are asking people to register. It's a great time to use kind of this concept of the enrollment bucket. And one other thing that I forgot to mention over here on the volunteer side, it's not just, what involvements that they're in and, what attendance we're taking for these. It can also be, do they have an active background check or not? Because I know a lot of you are being very diligent and being very careful about tracking those background checks and those different abuse awareness trainings, all those things in TouchPoint. And if they're checking those boxes, those can absolutely feed into engagement scores as well. So I want to make sure I touch on that before moving forward. Okay, so those are the 5 buckets of engagement as defined by yours truly. All right, so from there, manufacturing the team. So how are we going to get a team together? Who needs to be on this team to talk about engagement scores and getting these implemented? So we generally recommend kind of a mix of decision makers and those that know the database, know TouchPoint the best. Many times those overlap, obviously. But really what you want is to have kind of that mix of people who they can help speak into what the engagement elements should be, what we care about as a church in terms of how people are engaging, what they're doing that would define someone as highly engaged versus kind of low engagement. So we need those folks in the room, but we also need the database experts, the people that know TouchPoint, that can kind of be thinking and saying, hey, we can do this. Maybe that might be a little bit different. We're not able to do that. But we can accomplish these things using TouchPoint and using current software techniques. So having both those voices in the room as you're discussing this is very important. But then as part of those conversations, we're trying to uncover processes that might not exist yet that need to be built, right? Going back to our conversation about volunteers, perfect example. We're not taking attendance for volunteers right now. Do we need to start, right? If we're going to accomplish this, if we're going to do all the things that we want to do we need to start taking attendance for volunteers? Sometimes it might be even a little bit more painful than that. Having conversations about what third-party systems are being used on site right now. Do we have any ministries that, they're using spreadsheets right now because that's just kind of what they've always done and they're comfortable over there using a Google Doc, something like that. What do we need to do to maybe get that shifted over into TouchPoint? Is there some process that needs to be in place to get that done? This is also something that me and my team can assist with, coming up with clever solutions to get that data. Sometimes the solution is, someone's just going to have to input that information. That's just all there is to it. But other times we might have some solutions that can help. And a lot of times there's we'll have conversations with people that say, oh, I didn't even know TouchPoint could do that. We've been trying to kind of cobble something together. Turns out TouchPoint could have done that. And so now the conversation is, all right, how are we going to get this implemented? All right. So configuring the engagement score. So now we know what the engagement scores are going to be. These are the 7-10 metrics that we are going to use to define engagement at our church. What do we need to do now? Well, we need to assign a point value to these. So again, this goes back to my point at the top. This is not a value that says this is what Jesus cares about. These are the things that make someone a good Christian, or whatever the case may be. This is just how we're tracking the health of our congregation within the database. So what a lot of churches will do is use some kind of like a 10-point system, kind of a factor of 10 or 5, to say if you're a member, you get 5 points. And if you are an active attender, you get 10 points. You're an active giver, you get 10 points, and so on and so forth. And you can kind of weight those accordingly so that we have a kind of an accurate view of engagement. Because again, when we're talking about membership, you're typically not going to weight membership the same as you might weight being a volunteer. Because being a member just requires me to raise my hand. Being a volunteer requires me to volunteer maybe in the children's department and console crying kids, and those two are a little bit different. One of those does require a little bit more of me than the other. So making sure that you're kind of weighting those properly, and then finding a maximum, finding kind of a top amount that is easy for the rest of your staff to remember, the rest of the staff to sort of latch onto. Typically, I see a lot of churches try to do like a 100-point type scale, or again, between like 50 and 100, something like that, just so it's easy to remember. So when I go to someone's engagement score on the record and I see that they have an engagement score of 75, I know, well, out of 100, they're doing pretty well. They're doing pretty good with that score of 75, as opposed to maybe someone that is brand new to our church and they have a score of 20. So you could make it meaningful to the church as well. If there's some other number out there, obviously you could build towards that. And then a couple of notes here that I really wanted to make. I don't really have a perfect place for these in the presentation today, so I wanted to make sure that I call these out. The first is making that decision of what are we tracking? Are we tracking all of our congregation, or are we tracking like adults only? Just people that can drive themselves to church, because that's where we know that they are really engaging. And there's no right or wrong here. There's no right or wrong here. You just need to kind of have that conversation and determine what is it that we're trying to track. Are we trying to look at the congregation holistically, including kiddos that are attending childcare and children's events, or is it just the adults? And then the next note, just do it. So just do it. What I mean by that is engagement score is a big topic. There are 1,000 different ways you can go with these different engagement scores. When you're building out those searches, for those of you that have seen the search builder, you know that there's a lot of different conditions. There's a lot of flexibility there. And sometimes, in my experience, what I see is church leaders, we all have full-time jobs. We're all very busy, and we're putting out fires. And so when someone sits down and says, "Hey, what do you want these engagement scores to be?" It's kind of that paralysis by analysis. It's kind of that place you get to where you say, "I'm not sure. I can't get my head wrapped around that." And before you know it, nothing happens. So what I recommend to a lot of church leaders is to go ahead and put something in place. Just do the best you can. Make some educated guesses and put some engagement scores in place. You can even hide engagement scores so that it's just you, so that you're the only one that's really seeing it for now. And I should note there, the individuals don't see their own engagement scores. Just to make that clear. I don't know if that was clear from the top, but really engagement scores are hidden so that just the staff is seeing them, or even just some components of the staff. It doesn't have to be the entire staff. But go ahead and put some engagement scores in place so that when you go to leadership to have that conversation about installing engagement scores, you're not saying, "Hey, here's the possibilities. What do you want to do?" You're saying, here's what I've done so far. What do you think? I have this engagement here for active attender. Here's how I've defined active attender. What do you think? Do you like that metric? Do you not like that metric? So on and so forth. And you can kind of go from there to make it a little bit easier. Okay. So getting a couple questions here. So I'm going to pause just 1 second. Okay, so a couple of you have asked to kind of drill into that concept of membership that I was talking about earlier. So when we're talking about membership, really that bucket number 1 that I'm talking about of Andrew's 5 buckets of engagement scores, when I talk about membership, I'm talking about membership of the church itself. For some of you, that's going to be defined as a churchgoer, a parishioner, and so on. So that's a little bit different than someone who is a member of just an involvement, like a life group or a Sunday school class, something like that. That's kind of where that enrollment comes in, or if we're taking attendance, that's kind of the attendance component. So when I talk about membership, I'm really talking about their membership of the church itself. So, yeah, and so I'm seeing a few other comments that, but when we, at our church, when we say member, we're talking about someone who's gone through a membership class to receive that membership. That's exactly what I mean. That's exactly what I'm talking about, is kind of, and again, that looks very different for a lot of different churches. Some churches, there's not much that you need to do kind of on the membership side, but for other churches, you're receiving a letter, you're going through new membership class or classes before you are approved as a member of that church. I know I'm being a little bit broad with that category. We have a lot of different churches represented, and like I said, I work with a lot of churches, and it's amazing to me. When I go to a church, one of the questions I ask is, "Hey, what does our membership process look like?" Sometimes that's a 5-minute conversation. Sometimes that's a 2-hour conversation. It just depends. So I am being a little bit broad there, but whatever membership of the church means to you, that's kind of what I'm aiming at there. Yeah, so if there's time at the end with Q&A, I'll kind of circle back on that a little bit. All right. So monitoring scores. So now we have all this great data in the database. We have our engagement scores set up. We're looking at people's engagement, and we're seeing that on the record. Okay. Now what? Now what do we need to do? So going back to the search builder, we do have 2 really great search conditions on the search builder. And those are engagement scores and engagement score change percentage. So engagement score, that's real simple, real straightforward. Obviously, you put in engagement score equals greater to or less than 70 points, whatever it is. And now you're seeing a list of everyone in your database that has a score of that value, or more or less, however you're setting that up. Engagement score change percentage is telling you, giving you a list of people who their engagement score has either increased or decreased by whatever percentage you have specified. So if you're looking for a list of people whose engagement score has dropped by, say, 30%, you can use the engagement score change percent condition to find that. One way that I like to use this, to use this concept, is to have a condition, put a condition in there for, say, church membership, and say member. And I know I keep going back to that. Keep going back to membership. But hey, if we're tracking membership and we want to see a list of members, and of those members, how many of them have a score of, say, 30 or less? Well, now here is a list of people who we can go reach out to, because on one hand, they've told us, I want to be a member of this church, but on the other hand, they're not engaging much. They're not maybe attending or volunteering. Good. All right, the engagement score screen itself. So what I'm showing here, again, kind of this is what that screen looks like, what the engagement score screen looks like. On the left-hand side, we have the label, which is the Y label. And on this screen, it says engagement points. And that can say whatever you want it to be. There is a setting on the settings screen that allows you to modify that and adjust it so that it fits your nomenclature, fits your church's wording. The value on the left-hand side, I strongly recommend that you put something in this field. This is another one of the settings on the settings screen. So this would allow you, to show what that maximum value would be. If we don't put a maximum value there, and someone comes to the screen, and in this case, you can see on the screenshot, it says 100. If someone were to come to this screen and that value was not in place, and I saw this person has an engagement score of, say, 80. That sounds good, but I don't know if it's good. It might be good, it might be not. Because if our engagement score is out of 1,000, well, 80 is kind of a drop in the bucket. But if our engagement score is out of 100, well, now I know 80 is really doing very well. And so it's important to, in the settings, make sure that you're setting what that Y value is. And We have help documentation that can, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. Check the help documentation for engagement scores, and you can kind of see what those are. All right. And then I'll also mention badge color. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. Show engagement score. I mentioned a moment ago that you can absolutely limit who has access, who can see these engagement scores. Clearly, clearly the person that who owns this record, in this case, Jacob Ortiz. Jacob cannot log in and see his engagement score, obviously. But then even among your staff, you can even limit that further if you just want to make sure to hold that a little bit closer. And then badge color engagement. This is just for fun. It's very optional, but I think you should take just a moment. I think the engagement score shows up in that really nice TouchPoint blue color. But if you want that to match your branding, then of course I recommend updating that, which can be done in the settings. All right, so making informed decisions, what does that look like to us? Now we have some questions coming in, so I'm gonna, I really want to make sure we get to these questions. So these engagement scores can give us some warning signs. They can tell us about changes in attendance, changes in giving, and just that overall health of our congregation. And I love taking a moment just to do a little bit of segmentation as we're looking at these. We talked about those search conditions. So, hey, what is the average engagement score of our membership? What is the average engagement score of maybe our senior adult ministry as opposed to our young adult ministry, and so on and so forth. So taking those metrics in the search builder, slicing and dicing the data, and then applying some of our different engagement score metrics to it, you can really start to get a sense of how each individual ministry is doing. That can also help you build out lists. Now we know who we need to engage with, who we need to be reaching out to. So again, I used an example before of building a list of members who have low engagement scores. These are people who they have moved their membership to our church. They've gone through the membership classes. They want to be a part of this church, and yet their engagement score is very low. So this is a great list of people, very low-hanging fruit, people that we can be reaching out to and get them connected, get them maybe into a life group, and get them further along in their engagement with our church. So as promised, we do have some time for questions. So we are going to stop there. You can take a look at it. Stephanie, any that I need to make sure to call out here? Let's see here. One question is there a way for members or attenders to input their own engagement? Not really. This is something that is set up by the staff. And I'd want to know a little bit more about that. I think what we would try to do there is cast a wide enough net that we're making sure that we're capturing people that that might kind of fall outside the bounds of like what we define as an active attender. Are we making sure not to cut people off that might be attending something else? And I think that's where kind of enrollments comes in. Really, I tell a lot of churches, if you're tracking the data in the database, if the data is there in the database, we can get it out. We can usually have clever ways using Search Builder to get that data out and then incorporate it into our engagement scores. This is a really good one that I wanted to make sure to touch on. Can we use different formula for different campuses? Okay, so you're gonna have to envision with me. You're gonna have to be creative with me here. So if you are in a scenario where you are defining engagement scores differently between different campuses or different ministries, then here's what I'll tell you to do. Go ahead and create your searches for those different campuses or ministries. Here's what I mean. Campus A defines active attender as someone who has attended one time in 4 weeks. Campus B defines active attender as someone who attends 6 times in 90 days, whatever it might be. So now we have two different searches, one that reflects an active attender for campus A and another that reflects active attender for campus B. And you can do this by ministry as well. So ministry A, ministry B, whatever it is. We have those two different searches. Now, go build a third search and utilize the search condition called saved searches. So now you can utilize saved searches to put both of those searches together into one place. And now that is what becomes the engagement score, okay, for your active attender. All right. So basically, we're taking those two searches, we're combining them together into a third search, and it's that third search that tells us who has received that engagement score, who is an active attender. So I hope that's clear. I know it's hard without visual aid, but that's what I recommend there. All right. Okay, so a question about, let's see here. Easy way to help train Sunday school and Bible study leaders to take attendance for their involvement. So what I'll say to that is, in my experience, what works best is not simply an email. Don't send your ministry leaders an email and think, okay, done, check the box. Now it's gonna be perfect. What works best in my experience is bring those folks in on a Wednesday night, maybe Sunday afternoon, feed them lunch, something like that, and take the time to demonstrate for them exactly what that expectation is for them to take attendance. The easiest way, in my mind, the easiest attendance method in TouchPoint, in my mind, is the mobile app. Giving them the mobile app, sitting down with them, making sure that they can download that app, that they can get logged in, that they can see their attendance there, and that they're ready for Sunday morning. That's going to be the easiest way. But there are all kinds of great methods. I think we counted one time. I think there's like 12 or 13 different attendance methods in TouchPoint. The mobile app is, in my mind, the best because you're empowering them to do it. The other methods typically take a little bit more staff time. Of course, printing off roll sheets, providing roll sheets to those lay leaders so that they can check the name off of the list of the people who are entering the class. It's always a possibility that's probably never going to go away. I have a lot of churches that tell me, that some of our lay leaders are just not very inclined towards technology, and that's okay. And so let's just give them some pen and paper, and we can do it that way. So a lot of good options there. But what I really want to take from that is take the time to bring them in smaller groups and train them on what your expectations are. Let's see here. So there are a couple of questions that they're kind of asking similar things in different ways, and that is there a way to kind of bump up individuals automatically that their engagement score has dropped? When we see someone has dropped, there's other tools out there that if someone's giving falls beneath a certain threshold or stops or something like that, we're going to get notified about it. Can we do something similar with engagement scores? The answer is yes. I think the best way to do that is via Process Builder. You can build a search. You recall, if I go back a couple slides here, to our conditions. One of our conditions is engagement score change percentage. So we build out a search that's showing us people whose engagement score has dropped by X amount, by X percent over a certain time frame. And now those people are going to show up on our list. We can pop that into the Process Builder, and that can assign a task to a member of our staff to then go follow up with. The more manual analog version of that is to put that into a vital stats widget. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about there, then go to the help documentation and search for vital stats widget, and that can show you a list or that can show you the search and how many people are on that search at that moment. So you can go to that list and maybe make some phone calls or assign tasks manually. So the questions are really pouring in. I will do my best to get back on some of these questions. We are at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think I've kind of broadly answered a lot of the questions that are generally being asked. I will mention, I've talked about consulting a couple of times today. If you scan that QR code right there, that will allow you to compose an email to the consulting team, which is consulting@touchpointsoftware.com. As it says there at the bottom of that slide, consulting@touchpointsoftware.com. And we are happy to help. We do have consulting options and consulting subscription. For those of you that are kind of in the onboarding phase, many of you already kind of have those some consulting time. But if you've been using TouchPoint for a while and this is the first time you're hearing about it, we do have consulting services that can be kind of chunks of hours or a subscription. We've recently rolled out a subscription model in late 24. And that would be a scenario where you purchase 3 hours of consulting and that renews each month. So every month you have 3 hours of consulting time to use. So for anyone whose question I didn't get to, I'm so sorry. I will try to take a look at some point before the end of the week and try to get with you on that question. But I really appreciate y'all attending. This has been a lot of fun. And it's great to see you, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everybody.